is a 2006 Volvo V70R. I've had this one since December of 2016. Before I had this car, I had the same year, make, and model, and the same exterior color.
Always been a Volvo guy or just a car
No,
guy?
I've always been a car guy. I had a Fiero that has an engine swap and a bunch of other stuff. It's since been totaled. I wanted a daily driver, and I ended up buying the only new car I've ever bought, which is an '08 Scion XB. And I came to realize that, like, little mods trying to make it look nice, that it was still just a box car. I had a couple of accents coming off of my license, so I started looking at other things that I might like, and I wanted a wagon with a stick that I could afford and was reasonably quick. And that basically narrowed down to 3 different cars. The 2005 only Subaru Legacy GT wagon, the Audi S4 Avant B5 or B6, I think it's B6, with the naturally aspirated V8, but I kind of heard that they had reliability issues, which I've since found to be absolutely true. And so I looked into one of these, and when I actually checked insurance, it was cheaper to insure than the Scion, despite having double the horsepower and being a $50,000 originally car. And
that badge does a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Because who buys a Volvo station wagon other than a responsible older gentleman, which I'm not.
When you bought it, did you know you were going to work on it as a project?
No, I didn't. I meant to kind of leave it alone. Of course, I did not leave it alone.
You're a car guy.
I'm a car guy, yeah. I have to mess with it. I had some fairly decent mods to my last one. Not nearly as modified in the engine compartment, but suspension, everything else was done on that. And I ended up wrecking it into a tree while pairing my phone on Bluetooth at like 10 or 15 miles an hour. I argued with the insurance quite a bit because they wanted to give me like XC70 money, which they made $1 million of, because they couldn't find any comparable to this that were sold in the area. So I was giving them comparables all over the United States, and they said that they're not applicable because they're not in the area. I eventually got them to appraise it, and it was exactly worth what I said that it was worth, which is like $14,500. To fix it was not that much. I would have ended up with some money in my pocket, but it dawned on me, it's like, well, why would I end up with a rebuilt title car, put all this money into it, when I could just part out the one I have and go get the comparable that I was looking at in California? I always loved this exterior color, and the last one that I had a dark blue leather interior. And wow. I liked it. It had blue carpet and everything. It was really, really dark blue. And it looked fine. I always wanted this color, which is called Atacama, but this combination is exceedingly rare. I saw a forum post at one point, this is not Volvo official numbers, but they made 3.
Wow.
This was one of the comparables that I found in California, and I was thinking, like, how would I even make that work? And then I saw that, I think Allegiant had like $135 one-way flights. And I'm like, got some vacation I'm going to burn anyway. So I flew. A friend who wanted to come with me and then couldn't come with me and then decided to come with me anyway, he came. He told his other friend about it that I've never met, so he came as well. So we got to know each other very, very well.
Road trip, right?
Yeah. The third friend, unfortunately, he had to get back to work on Monday. So instead of a leisurely trip with sightseeing, we ended up having to drive almost straight through. We ended up in an ice storm in New Mexico that delayed us probably about 8 hours.
Turned into a rally.
Yeah, it was. We did 2,000 miles in like 50 hours. And we just rotated. One person could lay in the back, one passenger, and then the driver, and just kind of rotated through the entire time. I started putting the mods on it that I had on the last car almost immediately. The money I made parting out the old car came to quite a bit of money, so I took the engine from the old car, I modified it in a friend's garage that had a lift. Probably within a couple of months, I pulled out the old engine and just put the old car's cradle with the old engine and everything directly into this car.
So exterior-wise, is there anything that you did to it? I noticed the rear spoiler, is that stock?
The rear spoiler is not stock, actually. There is a spoiler that is there stock. It looks slightly different than that spoiler. It is ever so slightly more pronounced. And it was a massive waste of time that I would never recommend anyone ever do. It was a scope creep type of project where, like, oh, the spoiler's only like $150. I'm like, oh, and I could just buy some stuff and paint it. And I was like, look at the paint. Like, okay, that would be $200. So I'll just paint it myself. I hate body work. End up spending like 40 hours and having to paint it 3 times to get it okay. It still doesn't match. And then I realized that it doesn't have a third brake light. I had to get the third brake light from an XC70, which was fairly inexpensive. And the plug's right there. But then I realized that the glass is different, because the stock glass doesn't have that opening for the third brake light to peer through. I had to go find some glass, find an installer that was willing to do it, and it was just like this project that ended up spending like $500 to get a slightly different wing, and I'm like, this was so not worth it.
Well, now 1 of 3 is 1 of 1.
Yeah. Other than that, just some basic stuff, some badging. I converted it to quad exhaust. The car only had exhaust on one side from the factory, and that always bothered the hell out of me. So I ended up making a template out of like construction paper and reversing it, putting it over there and cutting the bumper. That's piped to a cutout that avoids the muffler. So I still have like the cat and the resonator, so it's not stupid loud.
What's the original grill look like? Is it just the regular plastic straight lines across?
Yeah, I think it's like a straight up and down, and it has like the Volvo diagonal.
Yeah.
That R is from the original grill, but it has a silver surround, kind of similar to that one. That was just one that I found somewhere and picked up relatively cheap, and I've had it repainted since because it was in pretty poor shape. Now the headlights I also converted to a reflector. They originally had an amber insert right here like is required. That's actually a piece of a fluorescent light fixture from my garage. I cut the shape out, heated it up with a heat gun to kind of match the inside curvature of the glass to fit where the original amber one did. And that project, I probably spent 15 hours on that project, mounting the projectors, making the reflectors, and all this different stuff.
Still less than the wing.
Yeah, still less than the wing. A lot of time in those, and of course everyone on the forums loved them and wanted to buy them. And I said, okay, well, for my time plus all these parts, it's going to be $2,000. And what do you know? All the buyers dried up after that. It's on KW V3 coilovers, and it's a little bit down from stock. My whole point with this car is I wanted to be like stock plus. Look a little bit different, but like totally could be stock. Like they look like they could be stock rims. I've got the Volvo logos in them, and they're definitely not stock. So it is a little bit lowered, but I still want it to be a functional car. And I also have big sway bars front and rear, and all the bushings are polyurethane. That is a pain in the ass project. All of the subframe bushings are Delrin.
Tell me about the wheels.
These are Fastco FC04As. I think a 19 by 8.5. They are not as strong as I would like. This car loves to bend rims because it doesn't have a ton of suspension travel and it's fairly heavy. So I run these tires at 50 PSI just to try to keep them from bending. And both rear rims are bent. I bent them immediately after paying $500 to have all four wheels straightened somewhere else. I am thinking about going down to 18s.
Just to give you a little bit more.
A little bit more sidewall. Part of it is that they're 19s, but they just look so good in 19. It's like, it's the right size for this car. Comes with Brembos, painted the calipers yellow, and put some Akebono performance pads on it because they don't dust very much, and that's it. I try to keep it as stock looking as I possibly could. I used all the stock piping. The only thing that's not really stock is over there is the methanol injection tank and the pump. This is called the white block Volvo motor as opposed to the red block, which is what you see in the old 80s blocky ones. It was developed, I think, in conjunction with Porsche. This was the highest output version of this motor in the United States. This stock made 300 horsepower and 295 foot-pounds of torque. These motors, unfortunately, are bored out to 2.5 liters and get very thin right in between the cylinders. So when you modify them, you can crack the block right there. It'll present kind of like a bad head gasket. So one of the things I did when I was modifying this motor is I did what's called shimming the block. And you literally buy 4 sets of feeler gauges from Amazon or whatever, and you tap in the feeler gauge in between the cylinders so the cylinders support each other. Immediately gives you about another 150 to 200 horsepower potential out of this engine because the rods are strong, pistons are strong, everything else is nice and strong. It's just that cylinder wall that you can crack it on a stock tune. This thing is probably making close to double the original power, and it's all stock rods, stock pistons, everything, stock crank. I'm guessing somewhere between 550 and 600 crank horsepower right now. I just put another turbo on it. The last turbo made 401 wheel horsepower in the dyno. This turbo is definitely flowing more, as according to the data logs, still iterating the tune with my tuner, and I would estimate that it's going to make something like 450 wheel horsepower, maybe 475, something like that maximum. I'm going to be honest, I love this car, but I also hate this car because it breaks so often, it's not even funny. Right now, it has a fuel leak, for instance, from the driver's side of the tank because the O-ring that seals it shrunk over time or taken a set, and I had to buy a new O-ring, which was $26, and I can't even replace it until the fuel tank goes below like 35%. Otherwise, it just spills out everywhere when you take the lock ring off. This thing just breaks all the time. The turbo breaks all the time. The all-wheel drive has a collar that strips out. I have a strengthened one in there. The actual motor itself is fairly reliable, especially once you shim it. But like all the other stuff, it's from that Ford era of like, oh, come on, kind of engineering. You know, it's just a modular platform. They just added more and more and more crap to it, and it just takes forever to do anything on this car.
What gets the most attention about this car?
Obviously, I think it's the exterior. It's not standard for someone to modify a wagon to be about as fast as a C7 vet. It's not common to see a wagon that isn't obviously modified but looks really good. They look at this thing and they're just like, why does that look good? That's a station wagon. That's not supposed to be something that looks good. It is kind of confusing. And so I do get quite a bit of attention, especially when I take it to meets and whatnot. It's different, and people appreciate that.